Indeed, in these days of rage, rage by the current occupant of the White House, rage by many of us towards him, rage between various groups in an increasingly polarized society, Sally's thoughtful examination of hateful behavior and how best to deal with it has great relevance. Sally, of course, has considerable real-world experience trying to bridge divides, or at least carry on conversations with those on the opposite side. As an outspoken progressive under contract with Fox News a few years ago, she regularly engaged conservatives, appearing to suppress whatever partisan nastiness she was feeling. She also has given a couple of popular TED Talks about finding compassion even for your political enemies, and nowadays offers commentary on CNN. For all her efforts to promote civility, though, Sally found her own attitudes and reputation for being nice sorely tested in the aftermath of the 2016 election. She couldn't understand those who voted for Trump, and she had trouble controlling her own partisan hate. Hence the new book, in which Sally looks at the roots of hate and goes on to offer ways of countering it in ourselves with positive and empathetic attitudes. She has managed to, as many of you probably know, trigger some controversy in part of what she wrote, and I think you'll find her addressing that this evening in a moment. But I found the book an inspiring plea for kindness and humanity that she delivers with characteristic passion and wit, and with no small amount of self-examination. She'll be in conversation here this evening with Candy Crowley, a veteran broadcast journalist who spent 27 years with CNN before leaving the network 3 years ago. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Sally and Candy.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Gotta pull my pants up. I forgot to pack a belt. This is a systemic problem I'm having with my outfit tonight, so we'll be all right, but, you know.
As long as you're seated, we're okay.
As long as I'm seated, we're okay. All right. It's a long shirt. It's all right. Hi.
Hi. All right, let's just start out with the controversy, which some of you may or may not have read about. Essentially, Amina Sow,
It's okay.
who is an African-American writer, blogger, businesswoman.
And podcast host.
And podcaster, objected mightily to a quote of hers that is in your book. She says she doesn't remember saying it, that you never checked with her about it, that you didn't ask permission to use it, and you say, she said it, I did ask permission, and I wrote it down, and I've extended my notes. Where do you go from here? This is almost a little bit what your book is about. How do we talk to one another?
Look, I'm glad to have the opportunity to address it. It is true, like the truth is, I asked her consent to quote her. She gave her consent to be quoted. She said the quote. I took contemporaneous notes visibly while she was talking. It is also true that as a white woman, I didn't look at this particular quote and see the ways in which it plays into, or could play into, racial stereotypes, or the way that it was potentially vulnerable for her. And I wish, and have said as much, that I had gone back and reconfirmed she was okay with me using the quote.
Looping back.
100%,
Which
and I've
you
said
would
I'm sorry.
do had you recognized the power of that quote.
Completely. And you know, look, right, and to me, look, this has to do with how we challenge each other and how we learn and how we move on. I can't control Amina. I've apologized for not reconfirming the quote. and tried to own up to my own biases in the process. But that's her decision. You know, that from there, it's up to her what she does with that apology. For me, the question is now, can I move forward? Look, intent, I can talk about intent for as long as I want. The issue is impact, right? And the issue is, can I move forward and be a better person because of this experience? And honestly, to me, that's part of what I want. Look, it's hard to learn lessons in public, right? It's hard to learn lessons, period. It's really hard to learn lessons in public. But what I also believe is that as a country, we have both history in our past and habits in our present of demeaning and dehumanizing certain people, especially certain groups of people, because of their ideas or their identity. That is a reality in our country. And we need to address it in our institutions, our policies, our systems, our norms, our culture, and we also only start to solve hate at a conscious and unconscious level when we open ourselves up to acknowledging the hate in us and take responsibility for doing better, which means we have to have conversations where we challenge each other and where we grow. That, I hope, is what we all do more of.
Did you learn something about white privilege in this? About some of the talk about this within that community of Twitter, basically where we've seen this. So within the Twitter community, it has been about how white women in particular use the words and the thoughts of black women to their own ends, to use their own ends. When you look at that, do you think, okay, let me step back here a minute, Sally, and look at how this, my father, it's as old as my father saying, you can't really understand someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes.
Which you can't ever do.
Which you can't ever do, right. But you gotta make that. Do you think that there is some white privilege in this that made you not see how this quote, which was a very sort of aggressive, quote,
Page 48,
and black women,
everyone. It's not, look, I mean, here, look, the truth is, Candy, yes. I mean, it's not like, there's a reason I titled the book The Opposite of Hate as opposed to, right, if you read it or if you go to read it, I don't think, the opposite of hate is connection, right? It's both how we start to understand.
Took away one of my questions.
Oh, sorry, but it's how we start to understand, right, that in spite of our differences and disagreements, which I think are very important to us as people and as a nation, they're what make us great, we understand how we are linked as people, as humanity, that we all share fundamental dignity and should be entitled to fundamental dignity and respect. And, it's not, I didn't call it connection, right? Because it's not, the book isn't about a destination, it's about a journey. And for me, it's my journey. It's a journey I hope we're on as a country. I hope we all are on. I hope people engage with and are on that journey themselves, because it's, we talk about the work one has to do on themselves, right? That's, it's not just right, work is a verb, right? You have work to do and you are working. And so it is, you're right, like listen, I wrote a book where I tried to talk in very specific terms about white privilege, implicit bias, unconscious racism, and that does not make me perfect or immune. So that's the reality of it. Now the question is, to me, then what do you do, right? Because there's a way in which you can, I think, whether we're talking about whatever our biases are, there's a way in which you can get stuck in a self-wallowing, self-flagellating, right? And that's unhelpful too, right? And in a way, it's myopic and self-obsessed. So the real question is, what do you do better, right? How are we all going to be better? How am I going to be better tomorrow than I was today? How are we all going to be better next week than we were last week? How are we as a country going to be better in 4 years than we are now, right? That, to me, is the question, is how you move forward better.
And have you come to an answer to that?
Well, no, that's why it's a verb.
Day by day
right?
thing, right?
That's why it's a verb. That's why it's a journey, I think, period.
So in a lot of ways, this is, you're kind of living your book in action at this point.
Yeah. That's,
Trying.
I wouldn't want to put
Is this
it that
harder?
way.
Okay. Is this harder than you thought? Having sort of been on the
Andy, where are you
receiving end of
going with this?
No, I just want to know if it's harder than you thought it would be dealing with this. Because the book is very straightforward about what you think should happen so that we can repair our humanity.
Yeah. It is. Look, it is, I am experiencing the ways in which, in valid, for often valid reasons, we are quite cruel to each other, even when our intentions are good and just. And look, I don't want to, belabor this point, but I want to say that in general, right, my biggest takeaway from the journey of this book, from researching the psychology and the history and the neuroscience of hate and studying the lives and meeting people who had been at the extremes of hate, ex-terrorists and ex-neo-Nazis who had left lives of hate behind, my biggest takeaway for me, the sort of mantra or aphorism I am, again, it's work, but going to try to live because of this journey, is, for the most part, most of us don't wake up in the morning meaning to be hateful. Most of us don't think of ourselves as hateful. And we tend to have a they started it philosophy of hate. That they were hateful and therefore I'm justified in, right? And that is a human psychological phenomenon, and it tends to be amped up with the intensity of social media and the media craziness in general that we're in. So my takeaway, my core, my moral code, if you will, that I took away from the process is I can only control myself, and I am going to try every day, as best as I can, to not be the excuse for someone else to be their worst self, and to be the inspiration for someone else to be their best self.
So let me give the audience, for those of you that haven't read the book, which I have read.
By the way, can we just stop for a second? Greatest journalist that ever was on television, right? Right? I just want to, with all apologies to all the other ones who I do dearly like and love.
And I apologize as well.
Greatest journalist that ever was on television. Just needs to be said.
Still not going to get you out of this.
Still, no.
How did you start
Just be true.
this book? Like what?
That's an opinion,
Like-
but it's a true opinion. All right. Yeah.
All of a sudden, one day you woke up and thought, I'm going to write a book about hate.
Well, I don't like hate, Candy. And I always sort of thought of myself, right, as a person who in the world stood against hate, right? And I thought of myself as a pretty kind, decent person and was reared to think of myself that way. And my early years as a community organizer, that was my idea of myself. And then I went to go work at Fox News. And
bored of it.
yeah, as a lefty lesbian. By the way, I'm a lesbian. I hope that didn't shock anyone. All right. You've also read the internet, you know. So when I show up at Fox News, listen, I thought they had some hateful ideas, supported some hateful policies, right? But also, I expected everyone, on air, off air, people watching at home, I expected them to be like totalistically and completely 100% hateful monsters. I just did. And that sounds horrible to say, but it's what I just expected. I thought they'd just be mean to me, they wouldn't care about me, they'd be homophobic, they'd be, right? I expected all hate. And when I went and actually spent time at Fox News, two things happened. I found out that these people who I still think, by the way, believe and support a lot of hateful things in the world, were quite nice to me as a person. Just interpersonally, they weren't what I expected. And cared about my career and cared about my family, and sometimes we could even find things to agree on, and were complex people who were more than just those political views. And I realized I hated them. Like, here I was thinking I was this like holier than thou champion of kindness and fighter of hate, and I realized how much hate I walked in there with, all the stereotypes and preconceived notions and judgments, and that led me to want to understand how and why we hate, because I wanted to fix it in myself. I didn't like that part of myself.
So in this book, you talk to so many different people here at all sort of levels of, sort of the micro level of hate, which is the sort of the personal feeling. You talk to Trump supporters, you talk to ex-terrorists, you talk to folks from the Middle East who's, I mean, there's one story in there about the man who ends up marrying the daughter of...
I don't like spoiling that one.
Sorry.
Y'all gonna have to read that one for
read that
yourself.
one. It's
I know,
amazing.
it blew my mind.
It's good.
Yeah, it's a good story.
So, of all of those,
Yeah.
what person opened their mouth and surprised you
Boy.
the most?
I find people delightful, right? I just do. Because they are capable of such extremities. And I felt so grateful to experience those extremities in people, right? Like you realize the horrific things that we can do to one another as people, right? Ranging from just as like petty cruelty and unkindness to genocide, and how intensely brutal we can be. And then you see people capable of such kindness and grace and even forgiveness in the face of that. So there were so many things that really struck me as moments. I will say, to pick a different story from Rwanda, I'd read about Rwanda, 1994, the fastest genocide in world history, 800,000 people murdered in 100 days. You covered it. By the way, we tend to, in the way we talk about these things, make it about, those other people, and they did this heinous thing, or even use words like evil, which distances us from it, and ignore the role of colonialism and the manipulation of ethnic groupings to control the region, and how that inflamed hate, how hate is in fact something that is created and not endemic. But I'd read about how people had, with incredible, frightening intimacy, killed their friends and their neighbors, and I thought, oh, friends and neighbors like the people I don't know that well who live down the block. And this was like when I went, and you realize like, oh, like you killed your godchildren. You killed the people you have Sunday supper with. You killed your brother-in-law. And, Rwanda, to their credit, unlike, for instance, our country where we often obscure the hateful and violent things in our past, in our history, and don't talk about them and confront them directly. Rwanda has memorials and sites of the genocide that are still quite visceral. I won't get into the details, but to me, it's the hardest part of the book. So to experience that, and to realize we're capable of that. And a philosopher says to me in the book that, we don't have mass atrocities because of a few psychopaths. We have mass atrocities. There weren't enough psychopaths in Rwanda or in Germany or in Serbia. We have mass atrocities because masses of people do this. Masses of people, which means any of us could do it too. They're normal, ordinary people who then do extraordinarily vicious, violent, hateful things. So there's that. And then to go to Rwanda, to see these sites, to experience these still very visceral memorials, and then go to the home of a Tutsi woman who who invited over her friend, a man she calls her friend, her neighbor, a Hutu man, who is the man who murdered her husband and her children. and to watch her. Talk with him, laugh with him, serve him tea, talk to him as a friend, to say, and talk about forgiving him. I'm going to be honest, I don't think I could do that. I have searched I don't think I could. It gives me profound hope that we as people, as human beings, are also capable of that we are also capable of, in spite of every reason not to, still seeing the best in others.
Do you think, did you develop any theory on whether these are special people in special circumstances, or whether everyone's capable of this? Because I have to tell you, I told you, I finished reading the book and thought, no freaking way.
Yeah,
like,
I know you did.
Somebody comes after me, I am like, well, I'm a scorched earth girl, as I told Sally. I'm like, you know, you mess with me or my kids, I am done with you, and I hate you, and I'm not gonna go back and correct that, because it's up to you to come to me. And I think that's normal, isn't that normal? I mean, to a certain extent, right? So I wonder whether these are special people who have the art of forgiveness, which I haven't developed, apparently.
Well, first, I should specify here, I mean, first of all, this is what I hope the book does, which is
aspirational.
Well, it is aspirational, but also I'm not looking, right? Like, I didn't ask you what you think about my book before I said, hey, will you come talk to me about it? Like, I think we should be wrestling with these questions as a country and as a species. I think it is important we talk about this, because right now we have a sort of default switch that is set as a whole to scorched earth. And I'm not sure that's what we want. I don't think it's healthy for us as people. I don't think it's healthy for our relationships. I don't think it's healthy for our democracy. So I should though clarify, I actually have no problem. There's certain kinds of hate I mean, I'm not a general fan of hate, but like if you hate Doritos, that's fine. If you hate the musical stylings of Kenny G, I am right there with you. I don't understand why anyone likes his music, but people do, apparently. That's, you know, but you can, right? I'm not worried about like you hate an ex or you hate a boss or like that kind of interpersonal hate that you have some specific reason for, whatever. I'm worried about the hate that reflects history and habits and patterns. I'm worried about hating people because of the groups they belong to, and hating groups of people because of their identities or their ideas. And that we have too much information now, certainly in this country and in the world, and we know that we do this. We know that we treat, you know, when black kids in elementary school do the same thing as a white kid, the black kids are more likely to get expelled, right? We know that we have differential sentencing and arrest and incarceration rates. We know that we have sexual assault and harassment and rape, like we know this. And to me, it all has that core root. It is our habits and our history of dehumanizing and demeaning certain people, and our unconscious and conscious beliefs and perpetuation of the idea that certain people are more worthy than others. That's the hate that I worry about. And it takes extreme forms, but it also plays out when we just treat each other like we're worthless. When we attack people who disagree with us, not because of their ideas, but because of who they are, where they're from, you know, what they look like, who they worship, right? That's ridiculous, and that's hurtful, I think, both at an individual level, but also to our democratic project.
And when all of these fine folks read your book,
hello, fine folks.
What do you want them to walk away thinking?
You know, I'm like such a nerd that I actually really am just excited for people to read my book, right? I'm proud of it.
Well, then tell me about your journey.
But what I'll say is what I love, the reaction I love the most that I've been getting, it's only actually been on sale for a week, but the reaction I love the most, that a bunch of different people have had in different reactions, and, from different communities, from the right and from the left, is that I read this book thinking I was going to hear about their hate, whoever the they is in your mentality, in your ideology. I was coming for their hate, but I found out about my own. And that's, to me, what I hope people take away, which is, again, we tend to see, if you think hate's a problem, we tend to think it's their problem, not our problem. And I could argue quite persuasively, at least if we're talking about, say, partisanship, which side in this country tends to be more hateful. You know which side I'm going to pick, the right. But I can't change them. And I happen to think, for instance, that the left, we're the ones, look, I'm a progressive because, A, I believe in progress, I believe in change, I believe the world changes because people change. And I'm the one who says I believe in equal dignity and equal opportunity and the humanity of all people. And so the question is, can I actually practice that, even for people who deny my humanity? Can we be the ones who take the high road? Because supposedly, we're the ones who believe in it. And
is that a daily
minute
struggle?
To minute, Candy. Minute to minute. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
It's like, it's almost a meditative practice, right? Brian Stevenson, in his book, Just Mercy, Brian Stevenson was a professor of mine in law school. And he said then, and he says in his book, that no one is the worst thing they've ever done. One of the other reasons I'm a progressive is because I believe in redemption. And I don't believe people are the worst things they've ever done. But we tend to, as human beings, we do this, and then we do this in our sort of tribal factions. We tend to forgive the errors or mistakes of our own, or even explain them away, right? But when the other side does it, however you define the other side, it's endemic. It's who they are, right? It's because that's who they are. That's who they'll always be. And it's not so. And don't we want to give people the opportunity to be better? Isn't that how we change?
And when you talk about systemic hatred, just things that are just built, they're cooked into how we live and where we live and where we go to school and all that structural things that are in place that don't foment hate, but they don't break it down. Mm-hmm. Isn't that kind of a big, it seems to me like a daunting task for all of us sitting in this room to get up and say, we're going to do something about this? Is that a government thing? Is that an individual thing? I know you're going to say both, but so I'm going to just
She knows me so well. No, it is, but look, in the book I make sort of 3 levels of argument when it comes to solution. So yes, let's start at the biggest one. Yes, there are systemic problems of hate in our country and in the world. We have solidified, ossified, codified hate into our policies, our practices, our institutions, our systems, our culture, our yes, and we need to do something about it. So for instance, patterns of economic inequality, right, that are produced by public policy, segregated schools that are the product of public policy, right? The inequities in the criminal justice system are a product of policy choices and are solved at the policy level. And we don't do anything about that as a country until we understand the problem. And so systems, right, need to change. People help to change systems, so people also need to see their piece in the problem and then want to be part of the solution at all levels. And so in addition, I think we need to all reckon and wrestle with our own hate, how it plays out at conscious and unconscious level, finally face up to that, and then, like right now, we're still having an argument about whether we have unconscious racism and unconscious misogyny and Islamophobia. We're still arguing about whether those are things, when the evidence is all around us, and I'd rather us be arguing about what we do about it. So you need to do something you need to see the problem at an individual level as well if you're going to be part of the bigger solution. And then do two things differently. One is get outside of your bubble. So in the book, I call it connection spaces. Again, it's related to policy, but also like 53% of Americans don't know anyone who's Muslim. Most Hillary voters don't know any Trump voters. Most Trump voters don't know any Hillary voters. 3/4 of white Americans don't have any black friends, right? It makes it easier to unconsciously replicate that history of hate that has left its thumbprint on all of our minds and unconscious if we are not actually experiencing each other. So that, and we see the difference it's made, by the way, with LGBT rights, that as people have known more gay people, we have less homophobia and more legal equality. And we also need to change the way we talk to each other differently. I mean, and relate. So when we are talking to people across differences, and in general, to engage what I call connection speech, so that we talk to each other with kindness and compassion and trying to assume the best in each other, which isn't always easy.
It isn't, and it's also not easy to find, okay, we need to know, like Trump voters don't know Hillary voters and Hillary voters don't know Trump voters. If you've ever been at a dinner table where there's one of each, you don't ever want to do that again. You know, and I think that there is this point, that there was a point in some of the stuff online, which I agree with, which is, why are the people that have been oppressed always the ones that have to go forward and say, oh, let's be nice to each other?
They're not. They're not. I mean, by the way, this is my book, right? This is my path. This is my journey. It's not mandatory. You're all going to do it. No, but did you know that? It turns out it's not mandatory, right? And also, part of the reason I wrote this book is because I want those of us. And I understand, like I'm pretty super aware that I'm white. I'm pretty super aware that I have a media platform. I'm pretty super aware that I can, talk to conservatives in a way that a lot of people don't feel safe and comfortable. And, I'm pretty aware of my economic privilege and right. And I realize that I can have these conversations in a way because of who I am and the spaces I occupy in the world in a way that I feel safe doing so. And that I feel like that's something that those of us who can, should shoulder that burden. Sometimes we'll do it imperfectly, sometimes we'll still have things to learn, but that is, right? Like I know a lot of people aren't gonna go on Sean Hannity's radio show, like I do, still. Right, and by the way, I don't go on Sean Hannity's radio show because I think I'm ever gonna change Sean's mind. I know I'm not. But because I want to talk to the people who are listening to him, who are not monoliths, who are not just one thing, who are not just the person they voted for in 2016, who are not just, right? And also, by the way, does anyone remember in 2012 when Sean Hannity said he was going to support a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants and started talking about how these are hardworking people who are part of this country, right? So I'd rather him do that than keep spewing hate. And I am going to take it on as part of my piece of the puzzle, my work, to try to have those conversations.
Tell me, since I'm, as a journalist, we all love stories, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So I want you to tell them a couple stories from your book. And the first one I want you to tell them about is Vicky?
Yes. It's still, as many times as I've talked about this, every time it sucks to talk about this. I feel a tightening. When I was in 5th grade, when I was in elementary school in general, I learned my lesson eventually, I was a bully. And in particular, there was a girl who, in the book I call Vicky, who had some challenges. And who, the person I am now likes to think the person I was then would have befriended, looked out for, cared about, tried to help. But I didn't. I picked on her. I tormented her. A lot of kids did, teachers did. It was horrible. And honestly, I didn't think about it much. I mean, I was aware, I remembered it, right? But I didn't think about it much until I started getting hate mail at Fox. And I had never had that experience and thought, I sort of had this knee-jerk reaction, like, who the hell does this? Like, who is mean to a complete stranger for no reason whatsoever? And it was as though my unconscious was like, oh, hey, do you remember what an asshole you were, right? And and it became something I had to reckon with. So as part of this process for me, I found her. Again, echoing what we were talking about before, I apologized. She did not forgive me. That's her choice. I needed to apologize. And she didn't forgive me. She said, look, the only way you can make up for this is to try to do better and try to help others do better and foster compassion in the world and stop others from doing what you did. And which is truly part of what I'm trying to do now.
I thought the compelling part of that story, I mean, first of all, it's amazing that you remembered it, that she remembered it, because sometimes things loom large in your own mind and it kind of goes into the general overall feeling of being picked upon, not a sort of a specific time, but that it didn't have a happy Hollywood ending. You didn't become best friends and now you bring her with you on book tour. She doesn't forgive you.
Oh, no. No.
And yet, I mean,
that's
she's
okay.
sort of saying
it's
that's
that she
okay
shouldn't.
with you.
I mean, I wouldn't, again, goes back to the conversation, I don't know if I could forgive her for having done that, right?
Right.
That's again, I can only control myself and try to be better.
And when you talked to a Palestinian man as well, I liked that story a lot. Tell them a little bit about him.
So, Bassam Araman, by his own account, when he was a teenager, was a terrorist. Now, we could get into the definitions of terrorism. It's not actually, I think, the word that's appropriate here, but his own word, he called himself a former terrorist, and when he was a teenager, he was convicted of terrorism for a grenade that actually he didn't throw. He wasn't there, but his friends threw at an Israeli military convoy, and they screwed up and no one got hurt. But they were still all eventually convicted of terrorism and sent to prison. And by his own account, he wanted to kill Israelis. And by his own account, he wanted to kill Jews because in the totality of his life, the only Jews he knew were Israeli soldiers, and they were one and the same to him, and that was that. So when he was in prison, they showed a film about the Holocaust, and he went to go see it because he thought he would enjoy seeing Jews be killed. And when he saw the film, it just broke him open. He couldn't believe what had been done, changed his whole mind, broke his heart. He befriended an Israeli guard, started asking questions and questions and questions after prison, went and got a master's degree in Holocaust studies, and founded an organization called Combatants for Peace of former Palestinian combatants and former Israeli soldiers and combatants who now work together for common understanding, relationship building, humanity, and peace. And again, people, when we look at, one of the reasons I went to the Middle East and sort of having been raised Jewish in this country, we talk about that as the actual language scholars use is intractable conflict. It cannot be solved. And depending on which side you talk to, we tend to characterize the people in the conflict as also, in a way, intractable. That they are invested in hate. They, are invested in violence. They are invested in oppression. They are whatever. And so to hear stories, and hear in particular this story, but there are others, of people who transformed in the midst of what is one of the stickiest and most enduring dynamics of hate in our world, again, it gives me hope.
And when you look at the current state of affairs, shall we say, In Washington, D.C.
What per se are you talking about, Candy?
Well, I mean, I think there is a feeling, and that has been expressed by a lot of people, that is, this is the worst it's ever been. Both sides, you know, hate each other more than they've ever hated. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Vietnam and
Right.
and when really hard hats and us kids were not on the same page, and truly, I think they hated us and we them. But how does it? Are there any comparatives to this time?
I happen not to think, first of all, I actually don't think it matters. Like, it doesn't have to be the most hateful time in history for it to be bad enough we have to do something about it. I don't think this is the most hateful time in our history. I mean, again, in spite of our rhetorical aspirations and professed principles, as a country, we have a pretty strong history of hate, right? Nation was founded when we
Civil War's
wiped
probably
out
up there.
Civil War. We wiped out native population. The country was built on slavery. We, you know, stage after stage after stage have tried to deny rights to group after group after group, right? We have a profound history of hate in this country that is still with us. What I think feels different about this moment is the media and the 24/7, 360 dynamic of the media, and the media's investment in conflict to get eyeballs, and also social media and the way that both we all now feel surrounded and kind of constantly bombarded by hate, and we can all participate in it more easily than ever. You know, regular folks like you would sit on your couch at home and maybe you'd say something hateful about some person or some group and it would just kind of stay between you. And now you can tap it out on your Twitter or whatever and it spreads. So that's different. It's more intimate and we're all more implicated in it in a new way.
It's almost like the internet was invented to, you know, we talked about, oh, this is going to bring us all together, and it's like tearing us all apart in ways. I mean, it's full of contradictions, as is most of life, but it's
Completely.
like this great thing that you think, I wish it had never been invented. You know, you can never quite, but we control it.
Right, and there are some beautiful stories in the book of people like Megan Phelps Roper, who is the grandson of Fred Phelps, the founder, Gesundheit, by the way, of the Westboro Baptist Church, who, you know, is the guy they would protest funerals with the God hates fags signs, that guy. Like they'd protest soldier funerals, US soldier funerals, because they believed that US soldiers were getting killed because we're so tolerant of gay people. This was even in like the 90s when we weren't even that tolerant of gay people. Anyway, so his granddaughter, this woman Megan, was in charge of their mission on Twitter. So she would go on Twitter and, you know, on like World AIDS Day, she'd be like, thank God for AIDS, and like nasty things like that. And it was because a few people who were the targets of her hate responded to her with kindness and compassion and humor, actually. It's really important here. So they'd be like, where's the God hates shrimp sign, or whatever, you know. That, you know, she's like, one of my favorites is like, right around Yom Kippur, she's like, the only good Jew is a repentant Jew. And this Jew wrote back like, oh, it's Yom Kippur, so I'm in luck, right? Okay. Anyway, but so she had this experience with these people who were, right again, remember, we think it's they started it philosophy of hate, even people who we think of as overtly, obviously hateful. And so to have these people who she thought hated her and who she was raised to hate be kind and compassionate to her, funny, human, completely transformed the way she saw people. She left the Westboro Baptist Church, left the hate movement, and now is helping to recruit others and pull others out of extremist hate. So that's also because of the internet.
Right. Some good stuff, too.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask some of your questions.
Oh, hi,
you all
audience.
submitted. Abby, I think this is from you. Connie Schultz said it best when she reviewed your book for the Washington Post. Quote, she, that being you,
Me.
is willing to lay herself bare to help us pry open our own scarred hearts. Was there a particular moment that pushed you to write this book in the age of Trump?
Great question. Hopefully not too bare. There's no centerfold, don't worry, folks. all the stuff I thought I'd gotten better with in terms of hating, in particular, the sort of partisan, right, version of it, started coming back for me in the 2016 election and the immediate aftermath. Thinking that, thinking some pretty horrible things about half of the country and some pretty endemic things about half the country. And in spite of the fact, by the way, that I'm one of the people who said this was the natural conclusion of our politics for the last 50 years, in the way that the Democratic Party, but particularly the Republican Party, has relied on a politics of fear and dog whistle racism and fomented racial resentment and hatred, and that this was going to happen, and this was, the consequences that the voters would lead to this. I still was like, those are some hateful people. They are all they are nothing but hateful, never will be anything but hateful. And I would go to dinner parties in my little liberal bubble, because I live in a liberal bubble, and my liberal bubble friends would sit around outraged and say things like, oh, those Trump voters, they are so Islamophobic and anti-immigrant and racist, and they're so hateful. And I hate them. And I realized, first of all, these were some people I knew, and who were not just that. Right? No one is just who they voted for in 2016, just like no one is just who they voted for in 2008. I also realized that I want them to vote differently next time. And I want them to change. I don't want them to always be Islamophobic. I don't want them to always be anti-immigrant. And I know if I tell people that they are hateful, and if I hate them, guess what? They will dig in their heels, they will never listen to me, and that's what they will always be. So since I hope people can change and learn and grow, and am invested in that, then I had to find a different way.
I like this one. What part of this book was the hardest for you intellectually, and what part of this book was the hardest for you emotionally?
The stuff about being a bully was hard emotionally.
Vicky's story.
Yeah, that's just hard. It's hard to, I put a lot of my own faults, blind spots, biases, mistakes in the book. That's the one that at a broad, it's the thing I regret the most in my life. And so to share that is hard. Intellectually, the neuroscience, right? Trying to understand and describe and make accessible the neuroscience when it is actually also a moving target of a field. It's such a new field, neuroscience in general, and there actually isn't much in the neuroscience of group. There hasn't been much studied in sort of how our brains hate in groups, hate in that group dynamic. So trying to wrestle with and understand that, probably intellectually was that was the most, that was the newest. That was, ironically, I grew some new neurons, I think, I guess. That's how that works. I'm not still.
Did you discuss the theme of your book with your daughter?
Yes, in fact, she is still angry that she couldn't draw the cover. And I have to tell you, there are a lot of quite cute renderings of the cover by my daughter, who was really mad. She also, I remember when we found out I was gonna actually write the book, it was gonna be a thing, I was gonna do it. We went out to dinner and she drew what she thought the cover should be, and then she wrote by Sally Kohn and Willa Hansen Kohn, because she thought she did the cover, so she gets co-authorship, and right? There's a lot of stories about being a parent in there and how I think about passing on, what I pass on to my child, and that I think a lot of us don't realize how we are inculcating habits of otherizing and demeaning and dehumanizing people in the things that we casually say about people after some event or about other, whatever, about the way we talk about politics in our home. So for instance, we are very clear in our home. We don't hate anyone. And that includes Donald Trump. Because living in a liberal bubble as I did, there was a lot of that. And she would come home from school and write. And I said, no, we do not hate anyone in our home. We can hate things people do. We can hate things people believe. But we do not hate people. And that actually deepened my own commitment to try to be a better role model for her.
And does she ever look at you and say, yeah, no, I do hate
Well, I mean,
them?
she's 9, so of course. And she knows it gets under my skin, so she does it worse because she's 9. I'm not saying it's working, guys, but let's judge her when she's, I don't know, 30? When do you?
45?
45?
When does that come?
I'm 41, and I'm still not quite ready.
So what is this is a process question, what is your writing process when you're so busy? This was actually from me. I don't know how you do it.
Good God, no. You know what is true is I had to stop a lot to do this. So I did, I was off television for some time. I stopped doing other writing. I stopped doing speeches and travel so that I could focus. And other than that, I also had to become, I'm a very anal retentive writer. I like to write, I work at a writer's space in Brooklyn, and I like to sit at the same desk every time and listen to the same album over and over again. And write, if I could, I'd wear the same outfit, but that only works for a few days. So and I had to, what I realized is with writing this much, that I had to sort of learn to write in airports and, write in between things and write in hotel rooms. And so it also made me a little bit get out of my, really strange writer habits. I actually love strange writer habits, by the way. They're fantastic. Do you have any strange writer habits?
Yes, I stare a lot at an empty screen.
That one's not so strange.
My strange habit.
That one's not so strange.
Sit there. Then how long did you work? I said 2 hours.
Oh,
What
wait,
did you do?
your mic tape, look, I'm going to help you. Yeah,
Oh.
you got to. Because I don't, the nice TV camera, just need to see your mic
I
tape.
wonder what's going on.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I had a lot of staring at empty screens for me.
Well, but no ritual, you don't need to have the same tea or the same.
I don't. Maybe that would help. Maybe somehow that focuses the mind.
Yeah, I don't know.
See, I sit down and think I should put a load of laundry in.
Oh, yeah. Well, getting out of the house.
Straighten out that drawer.
Getting out of the house helps.
Yeah.
For sure.
Because there's nothing around you to do. It's
Right.
like being in a hotel room.
I'm in a
You
little
can't fix
cubby,
anything,
and
right?
I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to. Yeah, the first draft for the first chapter I did do in a hotel room. Ana Navarro, CNN contributor, has her husband, I guess, has a hotel in Florida, and so she very nicely gave me a good rate, not a free room, but a good rate on a room for a few nights, because I was like, this isn't. I had so much anxiety about producing the first chapter.
Right.
I had to just, my partner was like, go away, because I think I was annoying her, and she's like, go away. And so I tacked it onto a few days of a speech, and I just had to make myself do it with no distractions. Yeah.
You didn't start to clean the hotel room or anything.
I mean, it was super. I did some online shopping. I mean, I'm not.
It's hard.
There was some procrastinating. I have learned, that's the other thing. I've never been a procrastinator. Writing a book, I suddenly can procrastinate in whole new and creative ways.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
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 My next
I was
book
good
will
at
be
it
about
in all
procrastination.
forms of life. So, so this one is the last one. I saved it because it's political. If you were involved in grassroots organizing for the 2018 midterms, what advice would you give to local politicians that would encourage high turnout and engagement?
So, great question. It actually has been very hard for me in this moment to not be an organizer. There is a significant part of me that just wants to pick up and go, join my friends in rural Pennsylvania or in, rural Ohio who are organizing. I think we are a couple things. I think we're at a turning point in politics, for better or for worse, where the charisma of candidates matters in new ways. In some ways, I think that's not good, right? In other ways, I think it actually is quite interesting, because we used to think, oh, you have to, especially to win in sort of purple places, you have to find someone with mushy, centrist, unobjectionable politics. And that, I think, has also been disproven, right? That the character, that we've become in a way so thin that we can also run candidates who have more bold agendas if they can connect to people. Because, in fact, poll after poll after poll after poll shows that the majority of Americans are progressive on most of their policies, but we've just never managed to actually run good candidates who say good things. So that's my first idea, is just especially from my side, let's try actually running good candidates who say good things. It's just a thought. And then, there's two different philosophies mostly at this point about politics, which is, are you going to fight for the people in the middle, or are you going to grow the pie? And I am very much a grow the pie. I'm not writing off any voter. I think that progressives and left candidates, and really sort of, left-right is, I think, becoming less relevant, and it's more about populist versus elite, and it's what kind of populist you are, but sort of inclusive populist candidates can win working class white folks, but I don't start there. If I'm running a campaign, I start by growing the base, young voters, voters of color, immigrants, new registrant, like getting, increasing turnout, right? Like that's where, that I think is both the future of politics, and it's also how we win in the short term.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem, I think you hit on the problem, which is that charisma really does help, because people want to follow someone they really believe in, and it doesn't really even matter if he doesn't espouse. I always say to my children, find someone that you agree on 3 major items,
Sure.
and that's your guy, because the rest of the time
Or woman.
you're going to disagree.
But here's the problem with that, right? Like, I think it means we can end up, people who are good at running aren't necessarily good at governing in this environment. And that's, like, if we're going macro, so if I'm just worried about winning elections, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find, for me, as a populist lefty, I'm going to find populist lefties who are charismatic, really good at connecting, good at the door-to-door, face-to-face stuff, and really good at the media stuff. And as, like, an American who worries about our democracy and our civil society and the future of our country, I think, holy crap, we need to just stop having this sort of bias towards telegenic, media-friendly, charismatic candidates, because they aren't necessarily always the best people for the job. I'm thinking of a few examples in particular right now who might be in the White House. So we see that, right? As that's also a dangerous road long term. You got to square that circle eventually.
Yeah, they could be both, though.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
which is problem is that's a little rare.
Who grew the Democratic Party the most in the last 15 years? Barack Obama.
Correct. That's right.
So,
that's right.
And he was both proved himself to be a leader.
It is possible. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the pendulum has swung, obviously, away from experience and the ability to govern. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Anyway, so yes. I ended on a hyper-partisan note.
You did? No, I'm going to not let you do that. And just
okay,
say,
ma'am.
What's not in this book
Oh, what's not in the
that
book?
you wish you'd put in? Anything? Or what's in it you'd like to take out? Oh, right, never mind.
Yeah. No, I have to say, I mean, it's hard to, it's incomplete. This is an incomplete look at hate. I think I wish there was more about other kinds of current bullying and cyberbullying. I think that's a profound experience people have. I think political incivility. There are pieces that I think are related and that are touched on by the other themes. But what I wanted to do was give what I think I did, which is give people insights into the world, into how we hate and who we hate, and insights into themselves. That they could both have revelations about people that they don't expect to have revelations about, whether it's a Trump supporter or a former terrorist, and also hopefully have revelations about themselves. And again, to me, it's a beginning of a conversation. It's not an end.
Thank you. Thank you all. You were a great audience.
Thank you, audience.
Appreciate it. Okay.
I'm going to go sign some books. FYI. You can buy them, and I'll sign them. Everybody, one more time, really. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm still your biggest fan.